Okay, we had international monetary system prior to World War One. Just like a general definition of the international monetary system. So the international monetary system are sets of internationally agreed rules, conventions, and supporting institutions that facilitate international trade, cross-border investment, and generally the relocation of capital between nation states. The classical gold standard of 1870 to 1914. Before World War I, most of the world, including the United States, Great Britain, and any European country, maintained the gold standard, which was the prevailing international monetary system at the time. Most countries wanted to standardize transactions between other countries because the trade was in such a good place at this time period. The gold constituted the international reserve asset, and its value was fixed by the declared par value that country specified, which was done in the Gold Standard Act of 1900. The condition was to relate currencies with an international reserve asset, which was the gold, to help contribute to relatively free trade and payments so countries could trade without having to change currencies at all. The period of 1870 to 1914 was called the Classical Gold Standard period because all the major countries participated in it. And during this time period, classical economists were interested in increasing the international efficiency of production, which helped with the trade. As I said, 1870 to 1914 was when all major countries were included in the International Gold Standard, so this was considered to be the heyday of the gold standard. People generally didn't conduct trade with gold coins. Gold coins did exist, but most people used banknotes or bank transfers similar to how they do today. And silver coins were also used, but by 1910 they had become token coins, so they weren't used as often. And also by 1910, most countries had monometallic monetary systems with gold alone as the standard currency value.
And to go off what she's saying about the monometallic monetary system, this was beneficial because before they could have bimetallic systems where there could be problems when one metal could its value could fluctuate more than the other, and it just could be a mess. And then also, as she talked about the silver coins, when they became token coins, what that means is the face value of the silver coins became more than the actual cost of the metal used to make those coins. And then, so, like she said, in 1870, this was when the gold standard really became known as the gold standard, but the British were the first nation to adopt this standard, and that was in 1821. So for about 50 years they had done this by themselves, and at this point in time they were the powerhouse. They had a great military, they were great economically, and people wanted to trade with them because of all their all the benefits that brought being connected to such a great nation. Germany was the first to take this step, and then many other European nations followed. This was right when the Industrial Revolution was taking off, and like I said, trade was just great and unprecedented levels. So then the U.S. in 1879, they joined the gold standard, and with them joining, they became the last country of all major countries in Europe and North America were now on the gold standard, and this connection led to more fluidity in the running of economics and trade between these, and they just were more closely connected. An example an exchange rate was the U.S. dollar was 1/20th of an ounce of gold, or $1 US was 1/20th of an ounce of gold. So 1 ounce of gold equals $20 US. And having an agreed exchange rate, a country couldn't add more money into circulation. So printing more money wouldn't be effective. It would just make the money already in circulation less valuable, and they wouldn't be able to exchange the money for the exchange rate of gold. And then also they only had one bank, and this was the Bank of England. So the Bank of England would give out any loans to any of the struggling countries within the gold standard to prevent any economic collapse. So why gold? Tying a currency to a commodity, this wasn't new. This had been done before, but gold was unique, and it was a good commodity to use because it was hard to find a replacement, and you couldn't really counterfeit it. And it was versatile in its uses. It was malleable. You could melt it down and turn to bars of gold, which is made it easy to store. You could just put it in a vault, lock it up, and easy to store. And it was relatively rare, and the fact that there's a finite amount of gold made it so, they could have used wheat and they could just grow more, and that having the finite amount was important. And later, and this is towards the end of the 18th century, or 19th century, Japan was a developing country, even though they're mostly known for their economic miracle growth, which occurred post World War II. But prior to World War I, they were developing with the Industrial Revolution, and they bought into the gold standard as well. So this represented international as a whole, not just the westernized nations were involved in the gold standard. It was also going into Asia.
All right, so how the system works, the domestic money supply was directly tied to a country's stock of gold. So this means, like, generally if, say, the country ran out of gold, then the country would kind of run out of money. So the internal balance was sacrificed to maintain the external balance, meaning there was a fixed exchange rate. And this fixed exchange rate facilitated the flow of goods and capital among countries. So since there was an exchange rate that was fixed, it just allowed countries to trade more freely without having to have higher exchange rates for different countries and such. So there was just like one single rate that they all paid. And so for the next 4 decades, there was this fixed exchange rate. And the success of the international gold standard was important when you consider the fact that there was no multilateral agreement enforced, which means there were no documents signed saying each country was a part of this system. So each nation defended its own currency in terms of gold, so they were able to do things freely as they wished. And the commitment to the gold standard came with cost of lower growth rates, and there were stable prices, but it was adjusted with interest rates to prevent gold overflow. So.
And to add on to this slide, with the pros and cons, and to add on what we've already stated, a pro in just about this helped the international trade market, and this is because having a common price made everything easier. So the same product would bear the same price in different places around the world. But there was a problem with this. There was no country or no organization that stabilized the global price level. So there was a decent amount of price fluctuations. And then another point that we've already talked about with the exchange rate, this is important. So if international trade took place and each person exchanged their government's form of paper money, it wouldn't really be valuable to them in their respected nation. So having paper money backed with gold, you knew that there was an agreed amount, and this really helps. So an example is if the UK and US were trading, like I said, US 20 US dollars equals 1 ounce of gold, and in Britain 2 British pounds equals 1 ounce of gold. So then 20 US dollars equals 2 British pounds. And this reduces the uncertainty in international trade. And some other pros is there's a long-term price stability, and it makes it harder for governments to inflate prices because they can't add more money into circulation. It provides fixed international exchange rates, like I just talked about, but the cons to this is countries produce gold, they're at an advantage. They have it in their, they have gold in their backyard. They can use that to their advantage, and that's not fair to the countries that don't have any source of gold. So that was a problem. There was scarcity of gold. So like I said about the finite amount, this limits the potential for growth in each economy. And then economists say that during recessions, the negative impact can be significantly reduced if you add in money supply, if you increase the money supply, but this can't be done with the gold standard.
And so some main benefits of joining the gold standard was to gain access to capital markets such as London, Paris, and Berlin, which were some of the largest markets in the world at the time. So being able to join and trade with these large cities were really important. And a compromise was required for new countries joining the gold standard in order to acquire these gold reserves, but a lot of the countries were ready to pay the price of access to capital markets, so they didn't have to compromise anything. Some monetary agreements were made under the gold standard. Some examples are the Latin Monetary Union with Belgium, Italy, Switzerland, and France, and the Scandinavian Monetary Agreement or Union with Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. These monetary unions allowed these members to treat each other's currency as legal bids, so they didn't have to use gold and they didn't have to transfer money-wise.
So the gold standard is left behind. Why is that? It works relatively well. It was fine, but then World War I happened, and that's taking a big hit on any economy. And the system just couldn't take while the economy is taking such a big hit. You had countries trying to take out loans and pay for war, and they couldn't because of the fixed prices. So as miners found new gold deposits, gold prices and currency values dropped. In 1913, the Federal Reserve was created to stabilize gold and currency values, but like I said, World War I broke out, and that really messed things up, and so they suspended the gold standard during this time in Europe so they could print more money, and this caused an insanely high amount of inflation called hyperinflation, just because war expenses were so high. And after the war, countries realized that the value of tying their currencies to a guaranteed value in gold, which resulted in most countries returning to some form of gold standard, but it was modified, and again, the inflation became so high that after the war, many nations just could not go back to the gold standard. And since then, really, the gold standard is dead, and that's about that. Hope you enjoyed.
Well, There's our sources.
And there's our sources.